and as a quarterback, you're dropping back and you look and you see a number one, and I mean, is that a linebacker? Is that a DB? That's a big deal because
Right.
the speed of that player. I mean, you're making split-second decisions that are subconscious.
I am Garrett.
I am Brandon.
We are here to talk about GOATs.
So we're gonna talk about, discuss, debate the greatest of all time,
Barry Sanders.
LaDainian Tomlinson.
You're listening to the Goat Herders podcast, where we herd the greatest of all time.
Welcome back to the Goat Herders podcast. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Garrett.
We got some big NFL news today. The NFL has decided to change the rules and guidelines around what jersey numbers players can have. And we thought we would talk about the implications of that, why they're doing it, and what effect that's going to have on our all-important numbers for the greatest of all time players out there, if anything.
So we'll start with why they're doing it. There was not a huge reason that we could find right off the bat. A big one is that eventually the number of retired numbers could eventually be a problem for teams. The Chiefs were a big one that we're getting close to having an issue with it, having so many numbers retired due to the great players that have played for them, that they were running out of numbers for players to be wearing, especially during preseason or when players are getting pulled up for the practice squad, that kind of thing.
Have that issue too. Just wow. I mean, they're both so old, the franchise. Right.
And just as time goes on, like that's going to become a bigger problem. So, what are some of the ramifications, Brandon, that are going to come from this?
Well, some short-term things are players are going to be changing numbers. And whether they want to do it this year or next year, that's going to result in some pretty big changes. This year, the players would have to buy out their numbers because jerseys have been made, they've been printed, and the NFL is not going to just say, oh, that's a loss. So if you want to change it,
we're going to eat that expense.
Yeah, they're not going to eat that. They're going to make players pay for it. But if you wait a year, then you can change it. And this in my opinion, puts fans in a really awkward position because you don't know if they're going to change. Why would you buy anybody's jersey this year?
Exactly. I could see their jersey sales being very low this year. Yeah. The other question I had with this is with that, they said that they had to notify the NFL if they were planning to change for the 2022 season. They had to notify them of that. So because I'm guessing that they would stop printing jerseys for them. So is this something that the general public is going to be aware of when they're notified of that? Or is this going to be a situation where, if I want to go and buy a Tom Brady number 12 jersey, am I going to be able to find it? Granted, he's not a really good example because
it's a horrible example. I would say like a Derrick Henry.
Derrick Henry is the best example. Am I going to know? Am I just going to find out because, oh, wow, there's not very many Derrick Henry jerseys in the store anymore because they stopped making them? Or is there going to be like an announcement every time that they get one that like, oh, hey, Derrick Henry's changing his number in 2022? Because if they do that, then the sales are going to go down for sure. Like then they're going to no one's going to buy Derrick Henry jersey this year. They're going to wait until 2022 when he changes his number and they start printing them.
I don't know. I think it's obviously a very short-term issue, but I'm glad I'm not in the market for any jersey.
Right. Because it's going to be a rough year. I can see this being a big problem for the NFL sales on jerseys. Is that with this change, I can see jersey buying going down quite a bit.
But then they're probably banking on that it's going to go up because. I mean, I know I wouldn't really care that much. I would just deal with it. I'm not going to put in extra money. But generally, I think a fan might be like, well, now I have this jersey that is old and I have this 22 and now I'm going to buy the 2 because it's cool and fresh. And kind of like when the jerseys get updated every 10, 15 years. People buy
Yeah.
the new updated ones. But yeah, it does have an interesting economic impact for sure.
Right. The next thing that I was thinking about is how is this going to affect players on the teams? Because I can see this becoming more of a problem of players wanting a number that another player also wants,
Mhm.
and that now that they're no longer restricted to just having specific numbers based on their position, this could become more of a issue. One of the ones, I'm trying to remember if it was in the article, I think it was for the Rams, Jalen Ramsey and who was the other one?
It
Jalen
was
Ramsey,
Robert Woods, I think.
Robert Woods, yeah. That they
I've
both
seen
wore,
a whole bunch of these.
yeah, they both wore the same number in college. So you're assuming that they'll both want to go to it. And in fact, there was even a thing I think on Twitter that or Instagram, they were posting back and forth about who's getting the number. So
Yeah, the Chiefs had one where Harden was like, "I want number 4," and Mahomes was like, "Number 4 is the backup quarterback." It's hard to be taken, but you're not going to get that.
Right.
And yeah, it'll shake out. But in the short term, it's people trying to change. I mean, normally it would be that number's taken, and then if you wanted to switch to it when they leave, then you could, but then you'd have to buy out your jersey, so they usually don't. But now it's like, if you don't switch now, you might never switch.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the mindset. Like you don't normally switch numbers on the same team very often when other people leave. So
Right.
So
And
I
then
think
our
one thing that's going to be challenging and just different is that you no longer will just be able to look at a number and know what position players are at. And
exactly.
I know that's not an issue in college and high school, but as a predominantly NFL fan, I always really liked that. It was very clear for the fans. You knew you could look at a glance and know.
Yep.
And that's actually something that Tom Brady brought up as this is an issue. This is going to cause problems for offenses. You're not going to know who to block because you're not going to know the numbers and what, like, you're going to have to, instead of being able to, it's so subconscious for them. It's not like they can't get back to it, but like they
Right.
haven't done that for 15 years for some of these players. Where
Right.
it's like you just look up and go, oh, I'm 55. It's a linebacker. Go get the linebacker. And as a quarterback, you're dropping back and you look and you see a number 1. And I mean, is that a linebacker? Is that a DB? That's a big deal because
Right.
the speed of that player. I mean, you're making split-second decisions that are subconscious.
And I think that's the biggest thing that's going to be affected by this. And that's something that I didn't even think about right away. But Tom Brady made a great point with that, is that's gonna change that part of the game. It's gonna affect the offensive linemen who they're looking to block. And like you said, the quarterback reading who's coming at him or who's dropping back into coverage or who's not, just by looking at their number. It's gonna take a lot more awareness on their part of who the player is, as opposed to what position do they play.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna have to be able to recognize, oh, that's I don't know, he's a linebacker. Oh,
yeah.
that's so and so. He's a DB. He's a cornerback. He's a safety.
And it was a lot easier before because those things, it's like riding a bike. It's like driving a car. Those things get internalized and you just don't have to think about it.
Right.
And now, at least in the first year or so, you're going to have to be thinking about it. And that's going to slow down decision making. Maybe I bet people are thinking that he's making a bigger deal out of it, but I actually think it's a really big deal.
Right.
Because they are making literally split-second decisions. Plays are 5 to 8 seconds long. I mean, and they go through reads so quickly, like it's going to have an effect.
And my one of my other original thoughts on this was the referees, them being able to see who is eligible, who's ineligible. But then when I actually looked at the breakdown, they didn't change that portion of it. So that's one thing they kept the same. is that ineligible players are still from 50 to 79. The linemen are still the same number gap, and eligible receivers are still everything else. So that was one thing that I looked at originally to see, is this changing? But that's not. The offensive line is still numbers 50 to 79. So that will still help the referees with who is eligible to go downfield and who's not.
Yeah. And then one more ramification about this is that players can actually use the same number they had from high school and college in the NFL now, which I guess for them is cool. I guess my favorite number would have been 5 throughout my childhood, because that would have been what Tomlinson would have probably stuck with. Instead it was 21.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't really change anything from a fan perspective long term. But
I mean, I'll kind of disagree with you on that, in that I think that's the biggest part of this change, is that now you take these players that have been playing with the same number, with their same pregame traditions, with their same, it's like a name to them. It's something that represents who they are. People that these guys have been playing since they were 5, 6, 7 years old. And a lot of them probably have had the same number since they started all the way up through college, because they were the best players on their team, and they probably got the first pick of what they wanted for number wise and everything. So I think back to when I was playing football and the traditions I had based on my number 7 in football. My junior year, I had cleats that were just completely falling apart. Like, they were falling apart to the fact that the cleat part was falling off the shoe. So I had both of the toes taped on both shoes to keep the cleats onto the shoe. So instead of just taping them every game, on my one foot, I put my dad's football number 24. And on my other foot, I put my number 7, which was just perfect. I didn't play it that way because obviously I didn't play my dad's number, but 24/7, just knowing like I was doing this all day, every day. That was something I did before every game, every Friday night, before we went out on the field, is tape that and wrote the numbers on his shoes. I'm sure that the majority of the players had something that they did, whether it was writing their number on tape on their wrist or doing something, getting a necklace that had their number on it. Like, that's part of their identity. And I'm really happy that they now can keep this going forward. At least a lot more of them will be, maybe not all of them, but they at least have that choice now to keep that part of their identity that has made them who they were over the past 8 to 10 years, instead of having to change just based on what position they played.
Yeah, I think you misunderstood what I was saying. It was just weird for me to think about how it would have been different for me, because 21 was so like important number.
Yeah.
To add to that, I had the issue of I never could have 21 for any of my numbers because somebody else wanted it. And so I always had 20 because it was the closest thing I could have. and it was hard because that was the player that I looked up to the most. And every sport I couldn't do it. And then in baseball, I had 24 because I wanted to be like Willie Mays.
Yeah.
So yeah, numbers are really powerful in sports. So if you're not a sports fan, you might not understand that, but players are very attached to them. They mean a lot to them. Garrett's story is an example of that. So I think that is a good thing for the players. I think it'll be fun for them. It'll be cool for them to be able to kind of keep that attachment to the number. And for fans, they'll be able to kind of keep that attachment to those college players a little bit more too, I guess.
Yeah, I think they're a huge memory trigger too. Like, you think about, I think the biggest one is you see the number 42 in baseball, you immediately think of Jackie Robinson. Yeah. Like, they have a day where every single player wears the number 42 because of what he's done for the sport. You think about the number 12 in football, and my thoughts immediately go to Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, like the two biggest people, I mean, that we've been talking about recently.
Terry Bradshaw, come on.
Terry Bradshaw too, yes. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with his number. I'm more familiar with the Immaculate Reception and him being a talk show host. But the number 20, like anytime I see a blue jersey, with number 20 on it, I immediately know it's Barry Sanders.
Yeah.
So I mean, like it's also a memory trigger that's gonna say like that's representative of this one player. No matter how many hundreds of players have worn that number, they're the one that made it great, and they're the one that's remembered for.
Yeah, there's a very strong emotional connection to numbers in sports. But we'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comments about what you think about this new rule change. If it's good, if it's bad, or just and if you have any favorite numbers that have come from sports. Love to hear your thoughts on this. It's interesting. It changes some things. It'll be interesting to see how it shakes things up a little bit in the NFL. Do you have any thoughts? Kind of close out.
No, I think just to re-say what you said, just any memories you have of a number that you love to have, the number that you wore in high school or in college, and any pregame traditions that you did, we'd love to hear about them in the comments below.
Hey, this is the Goat Herders Podcast. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Garrett.